We have an education degree, and you're going to pay us whatever we want to be paid from your taxes, and we're going to use education to mount a political coup, which is actually what the documents say.
Please welcome Robin Eubanks.
This is a scary story, Robin. And I'm like, yeah, you know what's scarier? Not telling the story that's easy to document. So I travel and I get up and I write a book. And, you know, some people have always wanted to write a book, and I'm not one of them. But there was no other way to tell the story. I was general counsel of a healthcare company in the 90s, and without really realizing it was tied, I had figured out the healthcare part of what's kind of the same model in the 90s. I've been kind of gradually uncovering the story for a while, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna go back to work. We've got all these new documents and rules and statutes coming out of the federal government. I'll read them. I'll be as much of an expert as anybody. So I get in the statute and discover that it's about 180 degrees from what Arnie Duncan's press releases are saying that they intend to do. And I know which of those is binding, and it's not Arnie Duncan's press release. So I started trying to dig in and discovered that everything that had ever been controversial was being expanded. Everything that had ever been proven to work well was being shut down. And it was being shut down using federal funding, federal rules. I never wanted to be a litigator because I didn't like to speak in public. So I have to be passionate about a topic to be willing to stand up in a group of people and talk to you about the facts. And this is a story that kind of, I didn't go looking for. It hit me. I'm a corporate and securities lawyer by training. During the previous version of this, it first started in the 60s, as I document in the book. That was round one. Didn't go that well, but it was where the effort was first laid out. The second round was what most people remember as outcomes-based education in the 90s. It was also called the Standards for Teaching and Learning. It was created in the city of Chicago, originally funded by the Joyce Foundation. The Annenberg Challenge comes out of those Standards for Teaching and Learning. If you read the platform of the Democratic National Convention, they refer to it as Standards for Teaching and Learning. It's what we remember as being fuzzy math. It's what we remember as being whole language. Common Core is simply the newest name for it. So I tracked down the history, I tracked down the documents, I tracked down what the creators of the theories say their intentions are. My attitude is, if you're using the same theories, it doesn't matter that you're not familiar with what the creator intended to do. It can be broken into 4 parts now. It can be renamed. If it's the same theory, it's got the same function. And so I've tried to do all that research, read the documents. I don't talk about things until I'm sure that, I say I go by the summary judgment standard. If I can't prove it to the where I'm entitled to summary judgment, we're not going to talk about it. If I have known facts, but I'm not sure yet how they're connected, we don't talk about it. But at the point that I have known facts, and I have theorized about how they're connected, and used that theorizing to track down the open declarations, this is what we intend to do, we get to talk about that. And saying that you're theorizing about a conspiracy when what you're doing is discussing open declarations of intent to use education for political purposes having to do with social, economic, and political transformation. If they say that's what they're doing, and we can prove it, we get to talk about it. So that's the purpose of the books, that's the purpose of the blog. I kind of have to get hit in the face before I'm willing to talk about something, but once I've been hit in the face, once I know it matters, once I know it's coming, we talk about it. And so that's my standard for what will show up on the blog for what's in the book. The book has 381 footnotes, and I didn't footnote every fact. I just footnoted the facts that I knew that people would probably want to know what the supporting document was to back that up. There are things in that document that have never been discussed in print because those books are just as graphic as they could be. And when you find that book, when you know it exists, when you find that report, you got it. And so that's what the book does. To some extent, the blog, I put the book aside and because of two events. In March of 2012, there was a conference over in London called Planet Under Pressure. And I discovered as part of the research on the book that there were ties between Agenda 21, climate change, and then the principles involved in it, what I call radical education reform. And so when I was reading the documents having to do with the Planet Under Pressure conference, they were all about education. They were all about using education to change what people value, to change what they believe. It sounded just like outcomes-based education. It was clearly tied to the Common Core in the U.S., but it scared me. I mean, who's going to be reading the documents having to do with the Planet Under Pressure? But they were operating documents. And then I monitor, when I first became interested in this story, it was back in 2009. And I monitor the National Center on Learning Disabilities. They put out a release in April of 2012 that under their definition of federal disabilities law that was passed in 1975, they thought every school in the country should be implementing positive behavior intervention systems, which means essentially that they were going to be targeting behavior in children, what drives it, monitoring it, and it was coming in invisibly. I mean, who reads the reports every month coming out of the National Center on Learning Disabilities? So it just sort of hit me that everywhere you would look, you wouldn't see what was coming. My focus in the book and the blog has always been on what's the actual implementation. Who has the authority to mandate what goes on in the classroom and what are they requiring? And so a lot of times people will talk about Common Core as an idea that they have a problem with. That's fine, but we're way down this road. The people who have that binding authority have laid out exactly what the classroom implementation should look like, and that's what I document. I document in the book. I lay out the history and all of the discrepancies, what was really behind the reading wars, what is really going on in higher education, what's going on in the teacher's pod, the documents that trace out the intentions, and pull all that together. The blog, I react on any given week to what's come out that week, and because I've tracked down what the words really mean, the binding documents, it's like I've taught myself a foreign language. So when these various agencies put out reports, I see what they're requiring, I see how it fits in. I kind of play the role of Paul Revere. It's like, this is what's coming. We can't solve a problem until we know what the problem is. And my job is basically to alert people to pull the actual implementation into the sunlight. And this is our tax money, these are our kids, it's our future, and we get to talk about the facts. When I was still at the stage of researching this and trying to, again, figure out why what was controversial was being expanded, why what was worked well was being shut down, one of the education school professors who's probably the most notorious in terms of pushing radical education reform. She was Obama's education advisor during the 2008 campaign, but considered to be too radioactive to be his education secretary. Her name's Linda Darling Hammond. And Linda Darling Hammond, who's now at Stanford, gave an interview, and she said that Common Core was mostly about social and emotional learning and getting the desired changes in the students, and that the purpose of curriculum was simply to be the means for changing attitudes, values, and beliefs. Well, I was pretty shocked by that. That's a really good admission. And then she said one more thing. She said that we were going to finally fulfill John Dewey's dream. And all of a sudden I had the idea, well, wasn't John Dewey just an educator? And so I just started doing research and pulled some of the biographies on John Dewey and got a feel for the fact that he was actually a philosopher. He was also one of the first psychologists in the country. Some of y'all may know that he taught at the University of Chicago, created the lab school, was there in the 90s, 1890s that is. And so I started researching what John Dewey's agenda was. And it was really, I was shocked, but it finally gave me the beginning of the answers on why you would choose not to teach reading. That you don't want, and he was very graphic. He said that, it creates that sense of individuality. It makes students think that they're somebody, and they can get their own set of facts. And so he didn't want people to be able to read well. So that's kind of how I came into the story. I started tracking it at the education level, and then I realized that every time I turned around, there was a political transformation purpose. And so I kind of followed the threads and have documented them and put it together in the book. People's experience, it differs from state to state. One of the things that has come out of Chicago is something called the CASEL, the Center for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. It was founded originally at Yale, but it switched to the University of Illinois at Chicago at some point within about less than 15 years. Illinois was the first state to pass legislation pushing social and emotional learning and also authorizing it. And then the Illinois, I think representatives, they kept introducing it in Congress. And Congress kept, and really, they really don't want us to be passing a statute about social and emotional learning. So what's happened is it's come in through the positive behavior intervention system I told. So it's coming in under federal disabilities law. They said if we only required positive behavior on kids who have discipline problems, then that would be kind of a black mark against them. So we want positive behavior to be used on all students, whether they're a behavior problem or not. And we want, if you look at the accreditation standards, remember I talked about the fact that I monitor who's got the authority. Well, the key authority is the accreditation system. And you've got North Central, which is a division of advanced ed. I've got SACS, which is also a division of advanced ed. So it's the same accreditation standards. And they issued them in 2012, getting ready for the implementation of the Common Core. It wants to keep data in 3 areas about the student. It wants to keep data about their social needs, their emotional needs, and their physical needs. Anybody hear anything about knowledge in there? That's not what they're interested in. All of the documents are very consistent that we're shifting away from knowledge. And they do it in language about equity. What is said, again, that the federal disabilities laws is one tool. Another tool is the federal civil rights laws. They're interpreting them as saying if there's if it's not accessible to all students, it can't be used with any student. It's called Universal Design for Learning, and it was incorporated into the Common Core specifically. I walk through it in the book, but also under the Justice Department's interpretation of federal civil rights laws. They are told school districts, you go at, if you're not pushing this whole child model, if you're not pushing classroom interaction, if you're not making it activity, then it's not accessible to all students. And so that's what I mean about tracking what the actual documents say. I talk about higher ed in the book. One of the things that a lot of people aren't aware of is that the race to the top standards said that if you're going to submit a application as a state, you've got to get your university system to commit to the fact that if a high school is using the Common Core, then the graduate is qualified to immediately go into credit-bearing courses. They won't be subject to remediation anymore. Now, by and large, if something is an academic step forward, you don't have to get somebody to commit in advance not to question the value of the credential. But that's not what they did. So Common Core kind of takes education and turn it into, they call it either P through 16 or P through 20. P through 16 is preschool through college. P through 20 gets in the graduate programs as well, until you're starting your career. But all of them are areas where they're collecting data. They call it longitudinal data. It's again, all of the information about social and emotional learning. That's what they're collecting. The information about how hard it is to change what you believe. That's what they're collecting. One of the things that the Common Core requires is that schools go to digital learning, because if you don't go to digital learning, you can't take the assessments that have been created, and they're not assessments about knowledge. I'll get into that in a minute. In order to get students engaged, one of the proposals is that you use video games. And they say that's engaging. It keeps students from dropping out. But it's not what most people think they're getting. And the video games and the digital learning have adaptive software. They know from the steps you take more about you than you do. The data systems don't care that Joe Black, did X, Y, and Z. What they care about is that people with certain characteristics, this is the curriculum that resulted in desired changes. This is how difficult it is to change kids in this school. We need to be more aggressive in the curriculum that's being done. All of that's very easy to do with digital learning. And it's just a tremendous amount of information. Yeah. Hi.
So part of it is to manipulate the outcome that the students end up with for how they think and process.
Yeah. The psychological focus has been around for a long time. The software, the adaptive software, the gaming software, the steps you take, it tells a lot about what drives you, what motivates you. One of the things that comes up over and over again in all of the assessments that are envisioned for the Common Core, including the formative assessments that get used day to day in the classroom, is they don't want you using questions that have a fixed answer, that have a solution. They want it to be an ambiguous situation. They want it to be an untaught situation. They want there to be no clear answer. If you know what somebody does in a situation where there is no right answer, you know an awful lot about that person and what drives them. And everything about the Common Core is looking for that information. When you talk about knowledge, a lot of the people who are involved in the constructivism I lay out in the book, subsequent to understanding all of that, I've discovered they almost all have artificial intelligence backgrounds. One of the things that they understand is that because they've been designing software programs, they are using their knowledge about how to design software programs and marrying it to psychological research that came out of the Soviet Union, where they were free to do psychological research. So we kind of came up with the theories over here. They did the research over there, and now it's made its way back to the U.S. being implemented originally in the Standards for Teaching and Learning in the 90s, outcomes-based education, and now in the Common Core. And when you track it, you end up, I didn't go looking for this. I kept coming up with the same descriptions, and it wasn't fitting, and I go at a very deep level, and when you go at that level, I kept coming up with curriculum where they talk about, there's actually a rubric now involving the Common Core. They talk about three-dimensional learning. They're interested in what visual image you have that you associate with a concept, what that concept is, and what you associate with it. So those are the three things, and that's knowledge to them. Knowledge is not a set of facts that you build up your own conceptual understanding through. They supply the conceptual understanding. You show that you're using it, and you show that you're using it because they keep asking you ambiguous questions where there is no fixed answer. So they know good and well the word commonly used is lenses. They know what lenses and concepts you apply when there is no right answer. That's a huge part of the Common Core.
And is the idea to change that lens, therefore changing the person's motives, way of thinking?
Absolutely.
So they get you where you're using the tool of the lens, and then they want to change that lens.
Yeah, and the phraseology that the Common Core uses is usually two terms. They'll talk about disciplinary core ideas. That's what's in the rubric. They also talk about the term of enduring understanding. Second, tracks back to a lot of the professional development under the Common Core. Third is understandings of consequence. That all of this, these are the broad concept. And the psychological research that they're relying on is that if you can affect how people perceive the world, you can change their future behavior. And so that's very much factored into the Common Core. And I know that because I keep running into that exact same language over and over and over again.
To what end are they seeking to modify behavior? What is the ultimate goal? Is it a classless society of serfs to serve the corporate interest?
Well, it's a communitarian vision. It is the documents all say that it's a public sector centric economy where there is no inequality, and they get to intervene to take it away. The theorists believe that ICT is the magic technology, the internet, computers, that we have now gotten to a base in technology that allows redistribution to occur without beggaring everybody else. That's not my understanding of economics from history, but you run into, if some of y'all know economics, there's kind of this dispute that's been going on for decades, where between the mathematical modeling and the kind of real world grounding. And you know, the New York Times bestseller coming out this week is Thomas Piketty's new book, and it's that vision. It's all about the redistribution, the inequality. Again, because this has been controversial in the past, because people would, you know, it's one thing to say we have an education degree and this is what we're going to do in the classroom. We're the experts. It's another thing to say we have an education degree and you're going to pay us whatever we want to be paid from your taxes, and we're going to use education to mount a political coup, which is actually what the documents say. Does the individual superintendent know that? Not necessarily, but they've been told basically this is the avenue to promotions. You follow this, you get the promotions. You follow this, you get the consulting work. You don't follow this, you're not going to get. We're going to push you into retirement. You're not going to be the principal. And everybody in education knows. In my state of Georgia, it's your last 3 years of working sets your pension for the rest of your life. So if you're an administrator and you're pushing this, in your mind, you're going to get promotions and end up with a 6-figure retirement for the rest of your life for pushing this. And you know, it's all kind of designed to create conflicts of interest, so that it's not in somebody's interest to delve too far. They get paid well for pushing this; they're going to push it. And most of them don't have an economics background. They don't have a history background. They don't ask questions. And so this bandwagon is kind of moving along. But if you put the elements together, there's not a dispute about what's being sought or what's going on. I wish there were.
The whole reason behind this is a better control over the citizens.
Yes, this ties in.
Advantage.
This ties into the advantage of anybody in the public sector or of anybody with political power. It ties the public sector. It ties in particularly to the tech companies. And if you follow the documents, they say that the idea is that you can now, that apparently that they think that what was wrong with the Soviet Union is they started with an agricultural base instead of already having a lot of rich industrial base. But secondly, they just didn't have the right computers. And with big data, which is getting thrown off, that you can now plan an economy, plan cities, make inequality the criteria that the government has to intervene to protect, and that's the 21st century. And this is happening now. This is the OECD that we generously fund is over in Paris, but which has a lot of jurisdiction. And when you hear about how internationally competitive in education, that's coming off of PISA, their test of 15-year-old. PISA was created, it's not a test of knowledge, it's a test of what you use in those ambiguous situations and what you apply and kind of how you think. And so it's driving global education reform. It's pushing this same model. But the OECD caused this change, the Great Transition.
What's
The new
that stand
economics,
for?
OECD stands for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development.
And it's a worldwide organization?
It is supposedly the industrial countries, so it's got 22 to 30 members. But yeah, it's one of the main drivers in education reform globally. UNESCO is one of the main drivers. The accreditation agencies report to UNESCO. So I didn't go looking for that. I kind of stumbled across it. So, but their agenda is what the accreditors are pushing, which probably has something to do with the fact that what they're interested in is your physical needs, your social needs, and your emotional needs, and not much knowledge. Let me do one more thing, because I said this ties in. There was a workshop recently that the Brookings Institute put on with people from Europe, from the US. It was all about smart cities, all about implementing it. And the report came out yesterday. I got the announcement this morning in an email letter. And one of the things they talked about in planning these smart cities and the public sector centric economy and how they were going to was all the data that was going to be produced from the laptop programs in these cities that they were pushing. So I know it fits, but I have a lot more knowledge than that. If you track it at a level, the documents over and over again say, this is what's going on. There's an initiative, you asked me about the data, it's called Future ICT, F-U-T-U-R-I-C-T. Future ICT, there are the documents, the idea that they can run a society off of big data. And it describes who's involved. It ties into the OECD. It ties into that economics conference that none of us get invited to that happens at Davos every year. It's very much tied into some of the people at MIT who do systems work. And there's a book that just came out by a professor at MIT at their media lab called, his name's Alex Pentland, P-E-N-T-L-A-N-D. He's written a book called Social Physics that lays out this vision. I've talked about it on my blog, but again, this is factual. They're theories, but they intend to implement theories in real time involving tax money, and it all ties to Common Core, and it all ties to education. And I didn't go looking for this story. It found me, but I am by training a due diligence lawyer. And when I'm investigating something, I'm going to get at the facts. And that's the instincts that I brought early on to the savings and loan industry when I used to take those mutual associations and take them public. And then I would tell companies that, you know, we can't take you public. You've got too much risk here. I then did it in the healthcare industry, and now I've kind of taken those same instincts to try to treat the business of education, what's driving it, who's got the authority, what are the real facts. And when I realized the story, I turned it into a book and a blog, and now I'm talking. What I'm seeing in the document is basically the destruction of college for everybody. It's still going to exist. It will still basically be a major employer in any situation where there is a college and university. So it's like we all exist to provide a stream of income over 4 years to colleges and universities. But again, the criteria about it being accessible to all is being used to change the nature of college. There's a report that came out of in January of 2013 that it's called a Crucible Moment. They held a ceremony at the White House to announce its release. There's a community organizer who actually trained Obama, and he looked up to him. And excuse me, he's called Harry Boyte, B-O-Y-T-E, in the Minneapolis area. It turns out that he was part of what a Crucible Moment ties into, but it's very much about using college to change attitudes and beliefs. So if they didn't catch you in K through 12, they're going to catch you in college now. So you've got, there was language in a Crucible Moment that talked about that if you didn't have the right activities, you didn't have the right attitudes, that perhaps you weren't going to get your credential. I also found the language in a Crucible Moment and brought it to the attention of the National Association of Scholars that they say in that document that they're going to use the accreditors as basically the enforcers under that vision. And subsequently, that's what the Department of Education has done. So if you're a college and university and you're not pushing what the vision that the accreditors want to push, then they can take you out of the federal student loan program, which is suicide for a college or university. So that they've got the death penalty to use with colleges. And WASC, which is the accreditation agency out in California, has actually did some reports involving what they consider the 21st century university. And one of the things that they bragged about in the report, they hired a futurist by the name of Marina Gorbis, G-O-R-B-I-S. And Marina, and the reports talk about how exciting it is that the accreditors get to be the driving agent of cultural change through education. And that's who a lot of people think are the watchdogs that are going to make sure that, and instead they're the primary poison delivery system. And there's nobody to say no to them. And in a lot of the states, they've been giving the accreditors even more power. In my state, if you don't do what the accreditors want, they'll yank your accreditation. So the school boards, our elected, I'll get to you in a sec, that our elected officials that we think are the watchdogs have been told by the accreditors that if they don't act unanimously, their accreditation is at risk. So if you elect, say, 3 members of a 7-member board that you think are going to push traditional academics, they can run into the accreditors, threaten their accreditation. And they're also told that they can't tell taxpayers that they are getting this pressure from the accreditation agencies. They are told that they have to go through governance training, and when they go through the governance training, they tell them that their accreditation is at risk if they do anything other than hire or fire the district superintendent and review the financials. Everything else is within the professional responsibility of the superintendent and their staff, and if they get involved, they're meddling in areas that aren't approved and their accreditation's at risk. So this time they mean it. Everything that has ever diffused radical education reform in the past, they've closed the doors. They've changed the nature of teacher evaluations. They have changed the nature of what constitutes student achievement. That's in the No Child Left Behind waivers that the states are getting. They have changed the nature of what the accreditors are looking for. They've changed the nature of what college is looking for, all at the same time. It's a very clever plan, but unfortunately for them, I keep reading the documents. Okay, you wanted to ask me something?
Knowing all this, how do we combat this?
Well,
What can we do?
The first thing is to to appreciate that it's not about knowledge, and that's what we're paying for. And the term I've invented to describe it is mind arson, because if your focus is psychological, because they have desired values and attitudes and beliefs that they want you to have, and if you don't have them, they're going to change the curriculum until you do have them. The concept that you hear a lot attributed to the Common Core that's kind of a buzz term is called growth mindset. It's from a woman by the name of Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. And Carol Dweck wants students to have a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. In other words, you need to be open to new perspectives. You need to be open to changing your minds. You need to be open to other people's. And so a lot of this comes in again under where parents wouldn't say it. Carol Dweck's book, Growth Mindset, that's what they were assigning in 8th grade class. So that's how they get to the kids, that they need to have a growth mindset. And so it's not just that they put this into the professional development that the teachers are going through. They're putting it into the kids' hands and saying, this is what, if you don't manifest a willingness to be flexible about what you believe, and then there's something wrong with you.
Some of the other states have rejected Common Core, but you're saying that through the accreditation, they're still having to teach Common Core.
What I'm telling you is, and one of the reasons I laid out what is in the book, I get this story. If you were to take outcomes-based education, the basic model, and call it double chocolate cupcakes, I'm going to recognize it because I've played with the tenets and what's really sought. So part of my goal is for people to understand what is sought, what its history has been, so that when it gets renamed, you'll still see it for what it is. When it gets broken into 4 pieces, so that and comes in through things like federal disabilities laws, civil rights laws, things that in July of 2012, President Obama signed an executive order for positive school climate. It all keeps coming back to the social and emotional learning. And it comes in, and the executive order, again, like coming in through federal disabilities law, it binds every school in every state. But it's coming in ways that no parent can see. But if you understand the nature of the problem, if you understand what's being sought, if you understand why it's being sought, and the history of these ideas in the past, that's the beginning of the solution to the problem. Just understanding what's being attempted here, that there's not a dispute, that it keeps coming back to the same people. There's a professor at Harvard called Robert Kegan, Kegan. He's tied into New Age philosophy. It's called his Integral Life, and he's tied to somebody, another psychologist by the name of Larry Kohlberg, Kohlberg. Through the blog, I see what's being searched out. So what happens is the teachers will go to their professional development. They won't like what they hear, and they'll do searches of what they've heard. Because I get a lot of activity on my blog, I capture the searches. So I can tell what's going on in professional development around the country and other parts of the world. I can tell what's bothering the teachers. And one of the concepts that gets over and over again in connection with the Common Core is people Googling Kohlberg's theory of moral development, because that's what the teachers are being told that they've got to push in the classroom. Kohlberg was Robert Kegan's mentor. Robert Kegan, again, his work comes in through K through 12, again through OECD that we talked about. It's called key competences, and that's what PISA's looking for. So the PISA test that you think that they're doing in the school district so we can be internationally competitive and the kind of economy you assume we're keeping is actually looking to what extent you have what he calls the stages of moral development. And those stages are basically, stage 3, you think of yourself. Stage 4 is you put other people first. Stage 5 is pure unadulterated, new age, consciousness alteration stuff. Okay, but that comes in invisibly through K through 12. Well, his stuff is also incorporated into the new definition of what the colleges should be pushing under that Crucible Moment report. So in the Crucible Moment report, they talk about this new company that's been set up from the guy that used to be the dean of the University of Illinois at Chicago. He set up in 2008 a company called Global Perspectives. And the Global Perspectives, if you get into it, they consider cognitive to be kind of social interaction, whether you appreciate the perspectives of other people, and then it's social and emotional. You just kind of keep running into that. But then they say it's based on Robert Kegan's work. So, invisibly where you're not likely to see it. That's what I mean. I keep running into the same people, the same concepts over and over again. That's what undergirds K through 12. That's what undergirds the anticipation of what's going to be going on in the college. And, that's not what you're looking for. But that's what teachers are being told. That's what the documents say. There's an RSA, which is Royal Society of the Arts over in the UK. They have something called the Social Brain Project. And the UK is about 5 years ahead of us on what are basically the same ideas in education. So you can look at the UK and get a pretty good idea of what's coming, what it looks like in a more advanced stage, which is pretty useful. It's a really good crystal ball. And so I monitor the UK. And you keep having officials like Robert Kegan going over there and giving a lecture on what his vision is for education through the classroom. You can watch it. Watch it on their site. You can spend an hour, and it's worth your time. There's no dispute. And his work is absolutely proved K through college, all over the world. That's the vision that they're pushing. The Common Core in Singapore, in the middle of that Common Core is core values. The next circle is social and emotional competencies. The next circle in that social and emotional competencies is what we call college ready here. And it ties to a report that a man by the name of David Conley, Conley, did for the Gates Foundation and issued in 2007. Tracks wholeheartedly. So it's the same ideas with slightly different language all over the world, but consistently the same pushes. You wanted to ask me something?
Yeah, how do we go after the accreditation agencies that are basically forcing these colleges to accept it? How do we stop them?
The legislators have that power. They're private companies. They're private companies that sell goods to the school districts and get to tell the school districts what they have to do in the classroom. It's a totally rigged system. And the first thing is for people to realize that's what accreditors do. That accreditors over college. I mean, people are borrowing money to go to college and taking on debt that will bind them the rest of their life. At the same time that the colleges are being told that you have to do group projects. It's got to be accessible to everybody. We want you to be changing students' beliefs. We want you to be creating projects where they reimagine what the future, and this is actually in something called the Lumina Foundation that's driving a lot of the changes in college. They created something called the Lumina Lumina Qualification Profile for Higher Ed, and it lays out that the colleges should be requiring projects that cause students to reimagine the world as it might be. Yeah.
A couple of things. I wanted to ask you, have you touched, or can you touch on the math situation with Common Core?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's starting from way young. And
Yeah.
the parents, they can't make, heads or tails out of it because there is no exact answer.
But it ties into the
And it
untaught
ties into
situation.
exactly what you're saying, yeah.
The metaphor I created is called the axe maker mind. It ties into the whole thing of mind arson. If you've got an axe maker mind, you can make up your own mind. If you've got an axe maker mind, you can get your own information. If you have an axe maker mind, you can come up with your own conceptual understanding from the facts. It's not the conceptual understanding that's been assigned to you through the enduring understandings, through the disciplinary core ideas. This recurring theme of the lenses and seeing things through the applied lenses is everywhere. And you'll listen to a professional development. And so it ties into wanting to teach math that way. So you have math that's grounded in the real world. so that it affects how you see the world, and you see the world in terms of problems that need to be changed. The teachers have been told that they're not allowed. I mean, they're getting rid of textbooks. I listened to an administrator with the state who talked about when he was at the county on a very well thought of suburban school district, but the school district superintendent told principals that if they were allowing traditional instruction, a sequential approach to solving math problems, they're going to lose their jobs. It's not the teachers that people go back to after they finish med school and say, your chemistry course is why I'm a doctor. It's not the lawyers that go back to that literature teacher and say, the way you taught Shakespeare made me want to be a lawyer. It's the great teachers are the ones that have been told they can't teach anymore. And it's like a fast track now. So many of the administrators have barely been in the classroom. And as they go into administration very quickly, they don't have a lot of experience with the students. They have been taught these ideas in the classroom. They think this will be a better world, and they don't have the life experience to know it won't work. And they're in charge. And they're in charge over the experienced teachers.
What is their desire for like the mindset of a child that comes out of grade school, high school, college? And where will their knowledge of the real world, like we grew up with, math, science, history, I mean, I know that we've written all the books already, but where will that be in, say, relative to what I learned?
It'll be almost non-existent relative to what you learn. And if you talk to a college student, you'll discover that the ones that like to read are already discovering that the typical classmate has a very poor factual understanding of anything already. But that's going to get worse. Remember I said a lot of the people came out of artificial intelligence? One of the things they've learned is what guides behavior is not reality, it's your perception of reality. And that's what they're trying to guide. And the way you do that is to limit factual knowledge and to provide. Again, they love calling them lenses. This Common Core Social Studies framework calls them lenses, and that they become the way you see the world. And the Common Core is just it's everywhere in that.
As far as the mathematics goes, I haven't done near the research that you have, but just I was a math major in college, and what little bit I've seen on the internet is that they're trying, for every single problem, they want the child to use theory to figure it out. They don't want them to know addition and subtraction tables. They don't want them to know multiplication and division. They want them to always be able to do it by theory, and like in multiples of 5s or 10s or 100s or whatever. It is not practical. The child needs to know the math tables, just like you need to know the alphabet for language.
A lot of the Common Cores they want to de-emphasize print. A natural side effect, as I lay out in the book, of learning to read phonetically is it's this like liberating effect on the abstract mind. A Russian psychologist by the name of Vygotsky figured that out, and so did a German psychologist by the name of Wilhelm Wundt, W-U-N-D-T, and they don't like that. So that's why you hear, it's called whole language, it's called guided reading. It's not a difference on how to teach reading. It's a decision that you don't want the typical person to be able to read fluently anymore. And with your math, what you're saying, that they're being taught to read theoretically, is exactly what I'm saying, that you're going to have lenses, core disciplinary ideas, enduring understandings of consequence. That's how you perceive the world. And if they haven't taught it, that's how you can judge that this is the concept that a student will apply in a situation. So the idea is you won't have a lot of knowledge, but you will all get together and you will come up with ideas, and we'll see what works, and if it doesn't work well, we'll try something else. It's, yeah, only somebody who has never had to worry about money and just think it shows up every 2 weeks would come up with these ideas, honestly.
Is it true, about a week ago, I heard that Indiana got Common Core out of their schools?
They got Common Core nominally out of their schools. But what happened is, remember I brought up the subject of the No Child Left Behind waivers? Well, the No Child Left Behind waiver said that you have to have college and career-ready standards. And I've also talked about those have particular meanings most people don't appreciate. But the people who do appreciate those meanings happen to work for the State Department of Education. So the standards that they are creating in Illinois, in Indiana, people have noticed, this looks an awful lot like the Common Core, but it's even less organized. It's because they're still trying to keep their qualification under the college and career, the No Child Left Behind waiver, and make them college and career ready, which means that the emphasis is not on what you know, it's what you do. It's on skills, and it's on to the extent it's knowledge in terms of the concepts. These are the broad concepts we want you to know. All 50 states are moving, and even in Texas, for example, they are all moving towards the system that was called outcomes-based education, standards for teaching and learning in the 90s. Texas went to outcomes-based education in the late 80s, one of the first states to go to it. They are, every time they've changed their assessments, it used to be called TEX, now it's called STAR. It's tied to something called Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. And guess what? Levels 3 and 4 of depth of knowledge are, do you apply the concepts? What do you apply in an ambiguous situation where there is nothing? You're starting to get the sing-song effect. It's everywhere. And so they are using Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. Park is using Norman, which is one of the federally funded under the Stimulus Act assessments. The other one is SBAC. So everywhere you look, whether they're doing Common Core or not, in every state, what you find is that they're intending to use Norman Webb's depth of knowledge in the classroom, and that the deep knowledge is tied to what concepts do you apply in untaught, ambiguous situation. And the other thing you find is that they have brought in a man by the name of Grant Wiggins, who originally tied to the Coalition of Essential Schools, and he and Jay McTee wrote a book, and it's called Understanding by Design. Understanding by Design is, the understanding is the broad concept that you're going to apply, and it's all about learning to ask the right questions. It's not factual knowledge, but everywhere you look, once you understand this to a certain level, without meaning to, you just keep running into the same ideas. They're changing how it comes in, but it's always the same goal. So Grant Wiggins has been brought into all those states. So they're using him. He's being brought to the National Teachers Conventions. He's going into the states. You know, he's who they use for professional development. He says his work tracks back to a man by the name of Ralph Tyler in the late 80s. And Ralph Tyler's interesting because he was at the University of Chicago. And he was head of the social science department there. And in 1948, he invented a really interesting term, behavioral sciences. So it's Ralph Tyler's work, and he was friends with Dewey's, worked on something called the 8-year study. So the same people actually track all the way through and the same ideas. And when I read something called KSAVE, KSAVE stands for knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, and ethics. It's what UNESCO says is their worldwide template on what they're looking for. And in the KSAVE documents, this was a conference in Shanghai back in 2011, they cite back as one of the authorities as being Ralph Tyler, his work on objectives. And it was his learning objectives work, which was tied to his push for behavioral sciences, that that became outcomes-based education. Benjamin Bloom, his mastery learning. Benjamin Bloom was Ralph Tyler's student. And they're also very good friends. And so it's the same people over and over again, the same ideas. They get, it can be called outcomes, it can be called objectives. It, as I lay out in the book, it's now most commonly called competency. It's what PISA is looking for. It's what the states are pushing for. It's when they say that they're going away from the Common Core, what they're not going away from is this idea of competency. And competency is skill, you can do things, and it's also a great way to hide values, but it includes both.
When, in the 70s, when I went to the University of Chicago, the first 2 years were labeled Common Core. And I see that a lot of this stuff, like Kohlberg is from the University of Chicago, undergraduate. All of these people are from the University of Chicago. And now Baby Core is being begun at the University of Chicago. So what is that? Is that, and Bill Ayers lives in Hyde Park, in the university.
It's where, as I just said, it's where behavioral sciences was invented. But more importantly, there was a sociologist there by the name of George Herbert Mead.
Yes.
And it is his sociological theories that let you kind of get that little c communitarian version of how the world ought to be into place. And that he created an environment that was very sympathetic to using education to change the nature of the world. Tyler leaves University of Chicago because apparently when the McCarthy hearings started, there are lots of people who seem to think that they were in trouble. You get James Becker, who goes to North Central, the accreditation agency, to be where he hid out. And he basically described it that way. Ken Goodman, who's known for his whole language, he was the one who basically said if you read the word horse as pony, it doesn't matter because they get the idea. It doesn't matter that they didn't read what was on the page. He talks about where he went during the McCarthy hearing. Well, where Ralph Tyler went during the McCarthy hearings was out to Stanford to create something called the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Science that was funded by the Ford Foundation. Almost everybody that's involved with radical education reform has done a stint at this Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science. It's where John Rawls was when he wrote his classic book, A Theory of Justice, that y'all may be familiar with. You know, if you don't know how things are going to turn out, what would you want the operating rules of society to be? He was working. He was doing he getting paid. They hang out together. The people who have come up with system sciences almost over and over again in all the versions of radical ed reform, they want students to learn to think as systems, that we are all interdependent, that all of their actions impact everybody else, that they're not to think of themselves as individual. Again, the system sciences were all created out at Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences.
What I'm hearing is Alexander, the Italian Gramsci's Long March.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, is there a connection with anyone from the Frankfurt School at Columbia, or was this an independent path that these folks took off of Dewey, who was fundamentally a progressive to begin with, and believed in this whole notion of scientism, which is what we're doing. This is the 1880s German version of scientism.
Yeah, I go back to Fichte in the book and mention that vision. Yeah.
But is there that link? Because this fundamentally is the Frankfurt schools.
Yeah, there is that link. I go into somebody in the book, the guy that came up with the polytechism vision is a man by the name of Robert Becker. He got federally funded grants. I lay out that. He's tied to the Frankfurt School. And the book, I don't talk about the Frankfurt School. I give a lot of information in the book. You've got to, this is kind of overwhelming stuff. So what I'm trying to do with the book is give the framework that would allow people, when they were ready to hear the story, to understand what's being attempted, what the history has been in the past, what its basic function is, what makes a society work and what it is that we're gutting that we're going to need in the future.
This is all very disconcerting and overwhelming. And getting back to the states, according to Dr. Duke Estes, professor in business science at Common Core, professor of English in Wisconsin, the GOP is actually pushing a bill to force the state to take over any private or public school if they don't reach a certain standard on the Common Core testing. Now that is very scary because that could go.
Yeah, this is the problem is that a lot of people who go into politics of either party is what they care about first and foremost is maximizing political power, and what drives them is which version is most likely to get elected in their state or in their congressional district or in their house, and they first and foremost want access to the trough of public money. And I'm not being mean, but honestly, that's what causes people to go into politics. And so this is the mother of all cronyistic, the trough will be overflowing for politicians to dispense schemes. And it's the difference between last year and this year of money flowing into the ed tech companies it went from about $350 million to almost $700 million in 1 year. They see this as just a gold mine. And I said I track at a lot of different levels. I'm a corporate securities lawyer by training. So there was, in this past week, there was a big leadership summit at Arizona State. It was sponsored by Arizona State, but it was also sponsored by something called Global Silicon Valley, because they say that Silicon Valley is now a concept and it's everywhere. They're basically raising money, and they wrote a 300-page, it's very similar to a prospectus, laying out all the different investment angles of the companies that are involved in ed tech and making money. It was a wonderful document. I had a really good time reading it. But it really laid out that they think that all of our tax money should be available to them to, instead of trying to keep customers happy, you just keep the politician that has responsibility for the contract happy, and you've got this guaranteed revenue stream. The university systems, as part of the Race to the Top grant, had to sign a binding letter on how they were going to treat the Common Core. So what he's saying is you can get around the way. I don't think so.
So the homeschoolers and private schools are just have to do Common Core. They don't have a choice. So what can we do besides bring people into our homes and try to explain what Common Core is? What else can we do?
I think that's a great start. I really do. The idea, I mean, the real story is very painful. But the real story is so outrageous that it really accurately changes how you regard government and the public sector in a way that is actually pretty useful for everybody to appreciate. Because, if you think there's something wrong with individualism, you're giving individuals coercive power with no downside for them, only upside at your expense. If individuals are selfish, what's going to happen to them when it's your money? They just get to if they push this, it's good for them. It's like the worst of all possible worlds. So we need to know the story, and we need to appreciate that. The historical norm is to combine economic and political power under the king. You only had what we call free market capitalism. You do this, I'll do that, we'll both benefit. Not the cronyistic kind. But that only arose in countries where the king didn't have any power to stop the people from taking it. It happened in the UK, it happened in the Netherlands, it happened in Hong Kong, it happened here in the US with this big expanse that couldn't be controlled. But given their druthers, kings don't give up that power. And in a lot of ways, this is the public sector saying, we want it back. And we want it back for our benefit, and we want it back for the benefit of our friends, and we don't understand, because we are creatures of the public sector for the most part, we don't understand what creates the resources that we want to confiscate. They don't know. And if we don't get a handle on this, we're all going to find out how much this is going to hurt when the prosperity is gone. And the documents say that they don't really want us to be prosperous anymore.
Isn't the whole thing a socialist, progressive, one world movement?
Yes, but not in the sense of having like a world legislature. It's more in the sense of having people who are well connected who make the decisions. And to go back to what we talked about earlier, that they do it using all of the big data that we're throwing off without thinking about it as we're online, through education, through transportation, through the power grid, with smart meters, all sorts of things that we're doing. You know, you can they know what's going on with traffic now because they can monitor cell phones. And they can tell by how many cell phones are in an area whether they've got a traffic jam. So there are lots of things we don't think about that people have thought about, theorists have thought about, and they're very excited about the possibilities. It's written in terms of a story. The first chapter is the expressed political intentions in history, and I picked 4 people. Babeuf was a revolutionary during the French Revolution, and he was the first one to say, if you want equality, you've got to get rid of knowledge, because as long as there's a difference in knowledge, you can make everybody equal, but it will become unequal again. So I talk about Babeuf, I talk about Johann Fichte, who basically created German education, and his idea is that you would use the schools to create this idea to act on behalf of the collected as if it was an irresistible impulse. Well, we know that it probably didn't turn out so well in the 20th century to try to create that focus through the German schools. But the problem is we go back to the focus on social and emotional learning. And if you read those reports, guess what they want to create? They want you to create an instinct to act on behalf of the common good that's unthinking. Well, you have no way of knowing what the common good is. So you're teaching students basically to respond to what somebody has told them the common good is. I mean, I can know my own needs. You can know your family's needs. But when you're talking about the common good in general, you're going to have to be acting on what somebody has told you the common good is, because you've got no independent ability to ascertain that. So that's a very dangerous thing to be teaching students to respond from. Then I talk about Marx, because he keeps coming up, and then Dewey. Chapter 2, I take you through the reading wars. I take you through the information on why they don't want to teach reading, what the upsides of being a fluent reader is, and what the downside is if you want political transformation. Chapter 3, I go into the math and science wars using all their own materials. I talk about something y'all may not be familiar with, which is called the psychology of mathematics education, that was set up, taking research from the Soviet Union. And bringing over and translating it into English between 1969 and 1975. Virtually everything that's ever been controversial in mathematics education came out of the PME and the research they brought over from the Soviet Union that ties again to teaching in terms of concepts, associated ideas, and the image. So it all keeps tracking back. I talk about competency and outcomes-based education and what the real goals are previously. So you really learn that in-game model, higher ed. And then in chapter 6, I start going through systematically, chronologically, what's been sought, citing stuff that people have not talked about before, where they were very graphic in what was sought. And it mirrors what we're seeing in terms of the actual implementation. Chapter 7, I take binding documents, either put out by the CCSO in the case of global competency. I go through universal design for learning, other aspects of the Common Core. I go through 21st century skills. What's coming to the classroom near you according to the people who have the authority, and then I end up with explaining the attendant social and political vision using the OECD and UNESCO's own documents, where they say this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And one of the things they don't want is to have unapproved technology. So basically, it would be as if you gave political power to buggy whip manufacturers around the turn of the century, and the buggy whip manufacturers were really well connected. Where do you think we would be in terms of technology? They would try to veto it. So there's a tremendous amount of power that the public sector is wanting, but it all ties in, and I lay that out in the book. And it gives you a base to talk to people from. In the early days of the blog, again, I put the book aside because I was so troubled by what I was seeing in terms of the real-time implementation. I started talking about that. I said, I can go back and tell you how we got here, but I need to alert you that we're burning. And so that's what I was kind of doing with the blog. Early on in the blog, they tend to be much more freestanding stories. It's more advanced now, but if you go back to about the first month of the blog, those are pretty freestanding. I'm starting to build a case type posts that really do, I think, give people a good idea of what the real implementation looks like in addition to what's in the book. Because again, this is North Central. So I know what Saks is doing in Georgia. They both report to they both belong to Advance Ed. Is that the school boards have been told they have no authority, and that they are not to buck the hired superintendent, and they are also not to tell citizens. But what I have found is, if you know that, they don't have to lie to you, but they can't tell you. And because when I figured that out and wrote a post about it, I had these emails from all over the state from school board members that said, I was not allowed to tell you that, and I'm so glad you figured it out anyway. I hope that was amazing and